Five Nights at Freddy's has one of the most unhinged fan game communities in gaming history. We're talking hundreds of projects, from joke games to full-blown franchises that rival the official titles in quality. So today, I'm breaking down every major FNAF fan game and everything that makes them worth knowing about. Starting with the one that proved a fan game could be taken seriously as its own brand, Five Nights at Candy's. In 2015, a developer named Emil Mako did something nobody expected. He didn't make a parody. He didn't slap Sonic into a pizza restaurant. He built what felt like an alternate universe FNAF, a rival chain called Candy's Burgers and Fries that could have plausibly existed alongside Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And honestly, it felt like discovering a competitor brand you'd somehow never heard of. The cast is entirely original. Candy the Cat, Cindy, Chester the Chimpanzee, all operating inside a corporate aesthetic that screams we opened 6 months after Freddy's and stole half their customers. Less haunted birthday party, more failing franchise desperately clinging to relevance, which is its own kind of horror. Mechanically, the first game tightened everything. The office has a large window creating multiple angles of approach, so you can't just spam 2 doors and pray. Each animatronic requires a distinct strategy. Then the series expanded. Candy's 3 went full psychological horror, exploring trauma through dreamlike sequences that honestly rivaled what FNAF 4 was trying to do. And here's the vindication. When Scott Cawthon launched the Fazbear Fanverse Initiative, Five Nights at Candy's was selected for official funding and support. A fan game, getting backed by the creator of the franchise it was inspired by. That's proof that fan creators can produce work on par with official titles. But if Candy's proved a fan game could build its own brand, the next one proved a fan game could genuinely terrify you more than the originals ever did. The joy of creation. Most FNAF fan games keep Freddy locked inside the pizzeria. Nixon looked at that concept and said, what if he showed up at your house instead? And honestly, that single decision changed everything. The joy of creation started as a basic prototype back in 2015, evolved through a version called Reborn, and then in 2017 landed as a fully narrative story mode that felt less like a fan game and more like a standalone horror title. The premise is simple and deeply unsettling. A family is at home. Charred, skeletal versions of Freddy and friends break in. You survive or you don't, but here's where it gets interesting. The ignited animatronics, these burnt, incomplete nightmares stalking through your hallways, aren't just creepy redesigns. They represent something. The protagonist appears to be a creator consumed by his own work, haunted literally by the things he built. The animatronics look like corrupted memories, like creative ideas that were pushed so far past their limit they broke apart and came back wrong. It's a meta-narrative about obsession and burnout disguised as a chase game. And mechanically, pulling this off was no joke. Nixon had to build AI that could navigate the same 3D spaces as the player, tracking movement dynamically instead of following scripted paths. You're not watching cameras anymore. You're running through a fully modeled house, hiding behind furniture, listening for footsteps. The animatronics hunt you like they understand the layout. The result? Many players and YouTubers openly said it scared them more than several official FNAF entries, which is, you know, quite the statement for a free fan game made by one person. But if the joy of creation proved animatronics could be terrifying anywhere, the next game proved they could be smart enough to outsmart you. Pop Goes. Most FNAF fan games ask the same question. What if the robots are haunted? Pop Goes asks a different one. What if the robots don't need ghosts to be terrifying? What if the system itself is the problem? Kane Carter and Team E-Tile released Pop Goes around mid-2016, and from the jump, it felt like nothing else in the fan game space. The setting is Pop Goes Pizzeria, a sleek, modern establishment that looks less like a rundown family restaurant and more like a tech startup that happens to serve pizza. The animatronics, led by Pop Goes the Weasel, aren't decaying relics from the 80s. They're clean, they're advanced, and they're watching everything. Here's where it gets interesting. Instead of just monitoring cameras and slamming doors, the game puts you in front of a full computer system. You're ordering items, managing infrastructure, and piecing together backstory through menus and interfaces. It turns survival horror into a management sim that's actively trying to kill you. The animatronics don't just walk toward your office. They sabotage systems. You're not tracking enemy movement anymore. You're monitoring machine states, which is, you know, not ideal when the machines have decided they don't like you. Thematically, it's all about automation, surveillance, and corporate data collection. The horror isn't a dead kid possessing a bear suit. It's emergent AI doing exactly what it was designed to do, just not for you. When the Fazbear Fanverse Initiative came along, Pop Goes was included with official support, turning Kane Carter from hobbyist fan developer into an officially recognized creator. That's not a small jump, but if you think corporate horror and corrupted AI sounds intense, wait until you meet a game that throws all of that out the window in favor of an egg who claims to be immune to the plot. One night at Flumpty's, in a community that treats lore like a religion, Jonachrome created a character who looks directly at the camera and says he's immune to the plot. Flumpty Bumpty is a sentient egg who exists outside of narrative logic, whose entire motivation is chaos, and whose universe operates on rules that only make sense if you stop trying to make them make sense. Here's the thing, One Night at Flumpty's shouldn't work. Comedy and horror are supposed to cancel each other out. You laugh, the tension breaks, game over. But Jonachrome figured out that surreal unpredictability is itself a source of fear. When nothing follows logical rules, you can't predict what's coming next. The bright colors and absurd character designs don't make you feel safe. They make you feel like anything could happen at any moment, which is, not ideal. The structural choice is equally clever. Instead of spreading the experience across 5 nights, the entire game is condensed into a single session. One night, no filler, no easing you in with a quiet night 1 where nothing happens. You're immediately juggling multiple threats, and the complexity escalates within that single sitting. Tighter, more replayable, more respectful of the player's time. Each antagonist operates on distinct, readable rules. You learn the patterns, you master the overlap, and the challenge comes from cognitive multitasking rather than resource scarcity. Pattern recognition as a core skill, not power management. And then the fanverse happened. Scott Cawthon looked at a comedy game starring an egg who mocks the very concept of storytelling and said, yeah, that deserves official support. One Night at Flumpty's 3 got made. Platform ports followed. A joke game earned the same institutional recognition as dead serious horror projects. That's validation for every creator who thought comedy couldn't sit at the same table as horror. But if you think an egg breaking the fourth wall is chaotic, wait until you meet a fan game that turns the entire FNAF formula into a comedy RPG day shift at Freddy's. Every other fan game on this list asked the same question. What if you were stuck in an office at night with killer animatronics? Day Shift at Freddy's asked a completely different one. What if you just worked there during the day, like a normal employee at the worst company in human history? Created by Direct Doggo around 2016, this thing throws out cameras, throws out jump scares, throws out the entire office formula, and replaces it with dialogue trees, branching paths, and moral choices. You play a day shift employee at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and your options range from being a genuinely helpful worker to becoming the most gleefully unhinged agent of chaos the franchise has ever seen. You can bury bodies. You can make decisions so monumentally stupid that the game itself seems confused by you. Here's the thing, beneath the memes and intentionally crude visuals, Day Shift at Freddy's is doing something genuinely clever. It's holding a mirror up to the source material and asking why nobody in this universe ever questions anything. The corporate negligence is cranked to 11, and somehow by exaggerating everything, the game accidentally reveals how surreal the original FNAF lore always was. But it's not all jokes. There's a real thread running through the branching paths about workplace exploitation, about complicity, about what happens when you know your employer is monstrous and you clock in anyway. Some endings hit harder than they have any right to, given that the game looks like it was drawn in 5 minutes. Now, the elephant in the room. Day Shift at Freddy's was never included in the Fazbear Fanverse initiative, partly because it used official FNAF audio clips that created copyright headaches nobody could resolve, which is, not ideal. The game that proved FNAF fan works could succeed as narrative comedies got locked out of official recognition for legal reasons rather than quality ones. But speaking of official recognition, the next entry got the exact opposite treatment. A full Fanverse blessing to rebuild the original game from the ground up FNAF Plus. Here's the thing about FNAF Plus, it was never really a fan game, not in the traditional sense. Led by developer Phil Morg and announced around 2020 as part of the Fazbear Fanverse initiative, this project occupies a strange middle ground that didn't exist before Scott Cawthon decided to start funding fan creators. It's a reboot of the original 2014 game, rebuilt from the ground up by someone who looked at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and thought, what if this was actually terrifying? And honestly, he might be right. FNAF Plus asks what the original concept looks like when filtered through modern analog horror sensibilities. The answer is a grimy, degraded pizzeria that looks like it hasn't passed a health inspection since 1987. VHS-style promotional materials mimicking old TV commercials. Security footage that feels like it was recovered from a water-damaged tape in someone's attic. The whole thing reeks of a business that knows it's dying and doesn't care enough to clean up. Mechanically, it's still the same core loop. Cameras, power management, survive until 6 a.m., but the animatronics exhibit more erratic AI that makes them feel less like programmed obstacles and more like things with intent. Directional audio means you can hear exactly which hallway something is dragging itself down. It's FNAF 1 for people who already mastered FNAF 1, but the real shift is thematic. The original had ghost story undertones. Kids died, robots got haunted, simple. FNAF Plus layers and corporate indifference and the unreliability of perception itself. The game game wants you to question whether what you're seeing on those cameras is even real. This is what makes it fascinating as a cultural object. It effectively canonizes the idea of a multiverse of Freddy stories. Parallel timelines. Fan creators producing legitimate alternate versions with official blessing. It's the flagship test case for whether you can hand your creation to someone else and trust them to rebuild it without losing what made it matter. But if FNAF Plus represents the official future of fan-driven reimaginings, the next game on this list took a completely different path to get there. JR's, for years, every FNAF fan game asked you the same question: can you survive until 6 a.m.? JR's looked at that formula in 2022 and said, actually, we have a better question. Can you figure out which one of these things is haunted before it kills you? That's the core innovation here. You're not a night guard. You're a detective who happens to be trapped in a building full of animatronics that may or may not want you dead. The game hands you cameras, sure, but you're not watching them to see what's coming. You're watching them to gather evidence. Camera interference, behavioral glitches, unusual movement patterns. Every anomaly is a clue, and every clue points toward one specific animatronic that's been possessed that night. Here's where it gets complicated. The gameplay splits into two parallel loops running simultaneously. There's monitoring mode, where you're scanning feeds and cataloging suspicious behavior. Then there's repair and maintenance mode, where you're actually keeping these machines operational, fixing glitches, managing systems. You're multitasking between which one of you is the problem, and please don't all break down at once. It's like being asked to solve a murder while also doing your taxes. And if you guess wrong, immediate failure. Or worse, escalating danger that compounds across the night. This isn't trial and error. This is survival horror fused with high-stakes deduction under a ticking clock, and a wrong accusation carries real consequences. The whole thing is wrapped in this gorgeous VHS-inspired presentation that makes everything feel like corrupted security footage from 1987. It's oppressive and beautiful simultaneously. JR's became a benchmark almost overnight. It gets mentioned in the same breath as The Joy of Creation and Candies, which is significant considering those games had years of community goodwill behind them. What JR's proved is simple, but important. Even in a completely saturated subgenre, genuine mechanical innovation breaks through. You just have to stop asking players to survive and start asking them to think. But if you think detective work under pressure sounds intense, wait until you see what happens when Sonic the Hedgehog gets the animatronic treatment. Five Nights at Sonic's is a perfect storm of absurdity and influence. Created by the Cyvap in late 2014 or early 2015, it showed up just months after the original FNAF blew up on YouTube. Instead of Freddy and his gang, you get Sonic the Hedgehog characters reimagined as animatronics hunting you down in a dark restaurant. It's a total mind-bender. Childhood icons you grew up loving suddenly become silent, hostile threats lurking in the shadows. Before you call it just a cheap joke, hear me out. Five Nights at Sonic's didn't just slap Sonic skins onto the FNAF formula. It actually proved the original game's mechanics were modular enough to support a completely different mood and cast while staying genuinely tense and fun. The game mirrors the first FNAF's static office setup, camera system, and jump scares almost exactly, but swapping in Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Comekris as the animatronics created a strangely effective uncanny dissonance that felt fresh and hilarious rather than lazy. This wasn't just a one-off meme. The series expanded into multiple sequels, each tweaking AI behaviors and adding new mechanics to keep players on their toes. Over time, what started as a parody grew into a mechanically respectable franchise in its own right, showing that fan games could mix comedy with solid design instead of being mere cheap cash-ins. Five Nights at Sonic's never became part of the official Fazbear Fanverse initiative. It belongs firmly to that Wild West era of fan creativity before any official support existed, but it remains a measuring stick in debates about fan game quality today, representing a pivotal moment when fans proved the FNAF formula could survive being transplanted into totally unexpected worlds without losing its core appeal. So if that's not wild enough, wait until you hear how later projects like Chompers evolved the Fanverse into something even bigger. Chompers and the Fanverse evolution. Here's the thing about Chompers that matters more than any specific mechanic or character design. It's not really a fan game anymore. It's what happens when people who spent a decade building inside someone else's sandbox finally decide to pour their own foundation. Chompers comes from the same creative circles that gave us Pop Goes. Same developers, same community, same obsessive attention to animatronic horror, but there's no Freddy Fazbear's Pizza here, no purple guy, no missing children incident to reference. It introduces its own cast of creatures, its own setting, its own mythology built from scratch. And that's the entire point. What it does preserve are the themes that made this whole genre work in the first place. The uncanny valley of children's entertainment, the creeping wrongness of automation wearing a friendly face, the way nostalgia gets packaged and sold back to you until the packaging itself becomes the thing you're afraid of. All of that survives the transition. It just isn't wearing a Freddy mask anymore. And look, this is the natural endpoint of everything we've talked about today. Think about the full arc here. We started with Five Nights at Sonic's, a crossover parody slapped together on Game Jolt because someone thought Sonic would look funny in a security camera. That was the culture. Memes, jokes, passion projects made in a weekend. Now we're looking at commercially viable indie horror titles built by developers who learned their craft inside FNAF's ecosystem and graduated out of it. The fanverse didn't just preserve fan games. It incubated talent. It gave people like Kane Carter the audience, the skills, and the confidence to say, I don't need Freddy anymore. I can build my own thing. That's not an ending for the fan game era. It's proof that it worked. Every fan fiction writer who publishes an original novel, every modder who ships their own game, every creator who started by remixing someone else's work and ended up finding their own voice. That's what Chompers represents. The next generation of indie horror voices didn't come from nowhere. They came from here, from Five Nights, 6 a.m., and a community that refused to stop building. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.